Hello, and welcome to People Unfiltered, powered by Ideas Global. I'm your host, Evelyn Espinal. The People Unfiltered podcast is creating the future of inclusion, diversity, equity, activism, and social impact. We deconstruct the myths and failures of DEI, sin pelos en la lengua, to evolve it or a rebirth. We go beyond surface conversations and dive into the hard truths and unspoken realities for deeper discussions with insights and advice. With me today is Christina Guckert, Head of Diversity, Inclusion, Belonging, and Emerging Talent at Reddit Inc. Excited to have you.
I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciated that just a year ago this month, I had you on a panel discussion for People Unfiltered.
Yeah, I remember
You
that.
were absolutely fantastic. It was, needless to say, a great conversation.
Thank you.
So it would be really fantastic for our audience to get to know you a little bit better. I'd love to know what got you into this field and really what is your motivation in being in diversity work?
So I've been in this work since I was 8 years old. And I say that to
Wow.
say, right. I say that to say I was always a very empathetic child.
Hmm.
And I remember sort of even telling the adults around me or like pressure checking the adults around me. I remember this one instance where I pulled up, I was a child, I pulled up to a McDonald's drive-through. I'm not going to say who was driving because I'm going to embarrass my dad. But we pulled up to the McDonald's drive-through, late 80s, right? And he says something about the people that work at McDonald's. And I just took such offense to it because I was like, well, what do you mean? I mean, they could be going through a hard time, or this could be the best thing they could get, literally as a child. And I've
Yeah.
always been that child. I could probably give you 10 more instances of me just being empathetic and wanting to make sure that the way that people thought and spoke about other people was aligned with being fair and understanding their life circumstances. So for real,
Yeah.
if I chose to be a janitor as my lifelong career, I'd still be in diversity and inclusion work because I believe that it's more of a mentality
Yeah.
and more than it is an actual position. Obviously, these days I hold an actual position, but I'm not new to this. I've been doing this.
So what are some of the influences that got you into it, right? Are there any particular people or a specific incident that really influenced you?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So, like I said, I've been this way since I was a child. The influence to promote fairness, no, there wasn't necessarily influence for that I can remember. But the influence to actually get into the work started happening before 2020. When I was the VP of recruiting for a conglomerate that included Billboard, The Hollywood Reporter, Dick Clark Productions in the entertainment industry. And as part of my remit, I was the VP of talent. So I was over OD, recruiting, and also diversity and inclusion. And there was just such a natural marriage between particularly recruiting and diversity and inclusion when we think about building pipelines that are sustainable and making sure that we'll be able to retain people that we were also attracting. And so that was really the first position where it was in my title. But prior to that, I had been head of HR at several other companies. I had been chief operating officer. So I was still over the work. It was not necessarily in my title, but I was still over the work. And even when I was at Turner Broadcasting CNN, I was doing HR for 6 Latin American countries. And nobody really knew what diversity and inclusion was back then. It wasn't sort of the hot thing. But I remember just looking at the data and noticing that we had several women in many of our other countries who were leaving the company at a
Yeah.
certain point in their life. And usually that was corresponding with when they had children or whatever. And so I started a program that increased our women in executive roles from 17 to 23%, and then also made it comfortable for women to want to stay after they had a baby. And look, like I said, this wasn't really diversity and inclusion work, but this was me sort of being me and being able to look at the data and say that we have a gap here. So it wasn't necessarily one influence. I hold the title now, but it's really been an important part of the work of my entire career.
Yeah. Yeah. And you do hold the title, right? You're the head of diversity, inclusion, and belonging and emerging markets at Reddit. So
Yes.
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank
How
you.
how are you today as your full self? How are you influencing people being able to be their full selves at work?
Yeah. Well, at Reddit, I'll tell you, it's not uh, the hardest thing because Reddit's mission, entire mission is really about community and belonging. And so, because that is part of why Reddit, the platform, exists to begin with, duplicating that internally is not like a far stretch, right? The inclusion and belonging part is not a far stretch. I will also tell you that it's still tech. So, diversity is, I feel like, always been an issue to sort of overcome in the tech industry. But that inclusion and belonging piece at Reddit is sort of built in there. So it really is mostly about getting folks to understand how we can take what is so important to us as a value on the platform and then translate that into people's everyday experiences at work.
Excellent. Oh, I love to know that you are having such a big impact in the lives of not only the people that read it, but also those that interact with the platform. I'm sure that you're having such an incredibly positive impact.
You know, I'll tell you, I don't touch the platform personally. However, the people that work for us do touch the platform. So just,
Yeah.
being able to sort of, it's a third party connection almost, but I would like to believe that us helping to shape perspectives, policies, et cetera, for the people that work for Reddit, the platform, also help to shape how they think about Reddit, the platform.
Yeah, yeah. Let's not underestimate the huge impact that you're having. I want to
I
just
thank
put
you.
a pin in that because I think that that's critical, right? As a woman of color, a mother, you're out there in the workplace really having a positive impact in the world.
Thank
This
you
is
so much.
why I wanted to have you on here so people could really, see the glory of the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
So
We're in the house.
recently, you posted a meme on LinkedIn, and I'm going to read it because it
Okay.
had an impact on me.
Okay.
And it said, there are times when you must speak, not because you're going to change the other person, but because if you don't speak, they have changed you. It goes on to talk about silence doesn't change the world, it changes us. It takes our stories and feelings away from us and buries them alive. I thought that was just so impactful. Can you talk to me a little bit about that meme and what made you post it and what are your feelings around that, especially in the climate that we're under? I think it's so appropriate.
Yeah. Well, what made me post it is the climate. And again,
Yeah.
I'm pretty empathetic. So like things like that always sort of get to my heart. Um, but it's so much bigger than the climate. So I don't know if you remember being a kid, and I don't even know if this ever happened to you, but I know for sure it's happened to me, especially as a kid. You hear other people making fun of another kid. I mean, children are cruel. I have a
Yeah.
teenager, and I'm still amazed at how cruel middle school and high school is for real, for real. But if you've ever heard someone making fun of another person and you just stood by and didn't say anything, and I don't know about your experience, but for me, that made me feel worse probably than the person being made fun of. I feel like
Mm,
it have such an obligation to stand up for other people, and not only be so focused on my own lane and on my own destiny that I lose the awareness of people around me. And what I really believe at its core, and this goes for the current climate right now too, because I feel like that is a microcosm of what is now happening on a very large scale. But character isn't built when the choice is easy. It's really revealed when the path is hard. And who you are is defined by what you stand for when it costs you something to stand at all.
yeah.
It's always about what are you willing to sacrifice to get there? Because when it's easy and there's no skin in the game, then, it's sort of unimportant. But when it's going to cost you something to say something, will you still do it? And I do believe that strong character is such an important part of not only living life, but being able to affect change. And so that's what prompted me to post that. To me, it really is about having the strength of character to speak up in a place in the world right now where people might feel very differently than what your lived experience is.
Yeah. And I love the implication of that, that it doesn't have to be because of the role that you have and the hat that you're wearing. And it doesn't have to be directed at you. It's something that you're like third parties visualizing something. It's this point of where is your sense of responsibility? When do you stand up for something that you really say that you value?
Where's your
It's very
humanity?
powerful.
Humanity doesn't have a
Yeah.
title. That's wild. Like
Yeah.
where's that North Star for you?
Yeah. Excellent. So when we got together about a year ago, we were anticipating what we thought this pushback on D&I was going to
Yeah.
bring, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were having a conversation about being in like in the room where it happens, right? Being at the table for those important conversations. And you just had this beautiful quote. You said, if you bring the meat, they bring the seats,
Yeah.
right? And to me, that meant as a D&I practitioner, you have to have the substance, you have to have the skill, you have to have the strategy, and you really need to be able to know the business you're working in. That's the meat, right?
Yeah.
And once you're there, then they're going to want you to be there because they're going to see that positive view.
Yeah.
Is that the way that you meant that, Cole? What was coming up for you when you said that?
Yeah. Okay. So I started saying that when I worked HR for HR when I was at Turner Broadcasting. And the origin of it was that so when you do HR for HR, as you might imagine, but just to clarify for the people listening, you are the HR person for other HR people. Super HR,
Yeah.
if you will. That's
Right.
not corny enough to say. What I noticed though is like HR folks are just people. And sometimes they can get in their own way, just like leaders in the business, with the added struggle of how do I get the business to take me seriously? And so, what I used to say to them is if you bring the meat, they'll bring the seat. Like, you're not going to have to beg for a place at the table if you're bringing something of substance. And doesn't only work if you're a DEI practitioner. In our previous conversation, that's what we were talking about. But the answer to your question lies deeper. So I just want to clarify in life, if you are bringing something that other people value, and you are either more skilled about it, sometimes you're louder about it, sometimes whatever, the people that value that thing will make a place for you. They will not, you won't have to beg for a place. And basically, it means that influence and access aren't given just because you want them. They're earned by bringing something that others can't ignore. Let's start with that. It's relevant to being a DI practitioner. It's also relevant on the other side. So the question is like, do I still believe in it? Yeah, I do. Here's the problem. It works on the other side as well. So if you have a group of people that inherently believe one thing, and they have someone who's loud about their opinion about it, who's forceful or is bringing something that's of value to them, they bought the meat. For DEI practitioners, that is also the same, but if there's a lesser amount of people at any given point in time that are willing to listen, that are willing to be influenced, then one meal will outweigh the table that the other person, if that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, I still think it's true. Like as a life thing, did we win in this battle, not the war? No. But I do think there's also, in this case, plenty of blame to go around.
Yeah. And I know that we've also talked about being really frank and honest, right? And so what I'm hearing and what you're saying is that DEI made itself vulnerable, whether that was through some performative work or not actually having the right skill sets and the people that were doing the role. But we opened the window, we opened the door, we gave the opportunity for the seats to be taken and for this broader attack.
Yeah, I think there's actually two things. So diversity and inclusion work always happens in waves. It always has. But even if I think about like the semi-recent past with the civil rights movement, right? There's waves and there's a big increase in awareness and support.
Yeah.
And then it goes back down. I mentioned earlier that lots of my background has been in the entertainment industry. I was in the entertainment industry during the Me Too movement, another time where, you know, the attention and care that was given to diversity and inclusion was really elevated. And then it went back down. And then George Floyd happened. Well, really a series of things happened, right? But then it was really came to its boiling point with the murder of George Floyd. And there was lots of attention again. And so if you look at data and if you look at the way that the world goes, we knew we only had a specific period of time to be really impactful before it would ebb or flow. You know what I'm trying to say. One of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. We only had a specific period of time. So the question becomes, what did we do in that period of time? This is by no means about every person that works in diversity and inclusion, because I actually know some really impactful leaders. But I will say this, there were also very many leaders in diversity and inclusion during this time that were not as impactful for the business. And some of it was because the fall of the business, right? When everything went down, the job descriptions looked like this: passionate about diversity and inclusion. Child, that ain't enough. When was that ever enough to lead any business function and be successful? Right? It takes so much more than just passion to lead any business function. It takes knowing how to pull and analyze data. It takes influence. It takes business know-how. It can't ever be a we are the world, we are the children moment without having a backing on how we're going to make the business richer, faster, stronger, and more impactful. Because if the two things don't go together, then you're disposable. And the function as a whole is disposable. And then even for the leaders that are doing good work, because now the opinion is somewhere else, everybody is now vulnerable. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing, in addition to the natural ebb and flow that was going to happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's very clear, and you articulate that incredibly well. You know, last month we had Tim Wise on our show, and he is an advocate for anti-racism. He's an educator. He's a public speaker. And when we were talking about what's the value that DEI practitioners bring to the work, his point of view is that, well, they need to be dismantling white supremacy in corporate America, that acknowledging that it exists, calling it out, because so many people have gone through their entire lives not even being aware of the fact that white supremacy is an issue for us to deal with.
Yeah. So I've actually been giving this some thought. And I believe that DEI practitioners can help, but it's not that simple. So for people that are listening, I just want to level the playing field for 1 second. And what is white supremacy? Because I feel like just like words like bias and other hot words that have existed over the last few years, people don't necessarily understand everything that they mean. And it could be such a turnoff to hear it in a context. And I don't want people to be turned off. I want them to listen to what the point that we're trying to make here. So level the playing field. White supremacy is pretty much the harmful belief that white people are better than others. Now, you might say, I know that's not me because I don't really believe that, but it's not just about people being mean. It really is what was built into the laws and systems for a really long time, giving an unfair advantage to one group over other groups. So this is not even about individual white supremacy. This is not about, well, I don't feel that way because my neighbor is Black and I love them. And this is actually not about that. This is not about the individual. This is about the systems that have been put in place for a really long time, that because of the nature of them, they disadvantage other people. So that means that everyday habits and rules, like doing things one right way, what we've been taught is the right way, can unintentionally lead to an unfair system for other people. Let's start with that definition, if we can. If that seems like a fair definition, let's start with that.
It does to me. I think you very clearly articulated that, and that makes a lot of sense to me. It's how I would view it.
Okay, amazing. All right, so let's talk about what DEI practitioners can do. What we do. We go in, we try to change these habits and to be fairer, right? We are inside of companies working on changing perspectives or at least adding an additional layer of perspectives for people. We help to adjust policies that favor one group over another. We help to adjust processes to help leaders understand and give leaders resources to help them understand how to create a more inclusive environment on their team, how to create an environment where people actually want to stay, right? Because, like I discussed just a moment ago, a lot of times we're raised of a right way of doing things, and that right way only takes into account the very unfair laws and processes that have been baked into the system. And so the leader's playbook includes this right way. And what's a lot of times necessary is that we come in and just give a different perspective on how your playbook actually might be affecting other people that don't fit into the mold of who the playbook was created for. That's what we do. That's what we can help. But even though we can help leaders change behaviors, we can help schools change behaviors, and sometimes we can even affect like workplace policies as a whole. It's interesting because one study showed that even with all this work that DEI practitioners work, when it comes to unfair systems, the efforts didn't actually lead to actual workplace change. All right, so now we started to talk about do we work to dismantle it and versus can we actually dismantle all the things, right? And the fact of the matter is there are limitations to what we're able to do because these systems are so deeply ingrained into the every single day habits that people live, work, and breathe in. Not to mention, because of the natural ebb and flow that we always see in this work, there's always a quote unquote recovery period where people go back hard to however they thought before, whether that was a power push or they felt like they were losing too much traction or they felt like things were changing too much. I can't pretend to understand all of the reasons, but it's really hard to make the claim of dismantling a system that's been around since time's beginning, right? Black people weren't even considered a whole man. Which means that they weren't allowed to be citizens in this country, which means they weren't allowed to buy land, which means, this whole thing, let's not talk about redlining and et cetera, that have affected generations and generations. We are one generation out from segregation. And people say like we're hundreds of years away from slavery. Yeah, but we're still one generation out from segregation. So when we think about dismantling white supremacy, I don't think that DEI practitioners are necessarily going to dismantle white supremacy, but we do help to affect policies and procedures to help create a more fair environment at work. And then people often talk about changing hearts and minds, like DEI practitioners work is to change hearts and minds. And I can't change how your mama raised you. I can give you a different perspective. But what I always say is like, if you want your heart changed, you call Jesus or whoever it is that you call upon. But you can't call me. But what I can help,
Jesus.
yes. What did Erica Badu say? Call him. That was Tyrone, but still. But what we can do, but what you can call me for is to really help implement fairer processes so that everybody has an opportunity to show up, to do their best work, and feel like they're rewarded and awarded in the same way.
Yeah, yeah. And right now we've seen corporations pulling back from DEI. And wondering from your point of view, what would a listener who's a practitioner who might be in an environment where people are pulling back, what could they be doing to remain relevant and to be ready for, as you said, it's cyclical, right? So this too shall pass. What do you need to be doing to stay relevant as the future unfolds?
I feel like for a large portion of this journey over the last several years, we've really doubled down on race, ethnicity, and gender. And in the low right now, I wouldn't even say in the low. This is what I'll say. Diversity really consists of dozens of factors that separate people's life experiences, right? Whether it's a socioeconomic gaps, cultural gaps, because they live in different countries. And so if you are working for a global organization, one thing that I find that people are still really valuing is how to lead people that are in other regions. It feels business relevant. Not only does it feel business relevant, it is business relevant. And it's not as politically charged as how to lead or how to identify how you might not be leading the women on your team in a way that they can really digest, or the Black people or the Latinx people on your team. It feels much more digestible, even though honestly, we're talking about the same skill sets. So finding a way to continue to reinforce the same skill sets that you want the company to have, but maybe doing it in a way that is relevant to the business that is important to them right now. And no doubt, you'll still be able to distinguish yourself as a thought leader and a person who should be at the table, a person who thinks of the business first and is helpful and impactful. And then there will be a time, because we've seen this happen a dozen other times, there will be a time when the pendulum swings the other way, and you will have taken the opportunity to continue to reinforce the habits and behaviors that are important for leaders to know and to practice, so that everything doesn't feel like you're starting from square zero again.
Are there any particular skills that you think DEI practitioners should have in common? Sort of, we should all be thinking about perfecting a particular competencies that are going to make us even better when that opportunity comes.
Yeah. So I mentioned a few of them earlier, but I just want to give a little bit more context before I re-mention them. Everybody has a different life path. My life path in particular, I mentioned, has really taken me to several different industries and several different roles, mostly around HR, but also like the subsets of that, right? So head of HR, but also a business person in talent acquisition, obviously diversity and inclusion. I was chief operating officer, and being able to see the business from all of these different angles and being able to be involved in different industries and then see the patterns that are important to all businesses, regardless of the industry that they operate within, has been really helpful for me to grow as a business person, because it helps me to lead first with what's going to be valuable and impactful, and not first lead with my agenda if it's not directly related to what the business thinks that they need at the time. And so my advice would be the competencies that are really necessary to be an effective DEI practitioner is first learning data inside and out, and learning how to tell the story with data. And I don't mean looking at data and repeating it to people. That's easy. Anybody can do that. What I mean is being able to lay matrix information on top of each other, analyze cause, be able to decipher between causation and correlation, tell the story of what might be happening, be able to predict what could happen next based on what's happened before, and then help to create proactive solutions around what might be coming around the corner that you can't see yet. That's number one.
That.
Helpful.
That's only one competency. I love it.
That's one competency, but that's helpful. That's helpful
Yeah.
for a DEI practitioner. That's helpful if you're an HR person. That's helpful if you're a product person. That's helpful. That's what businesses need, right? But now your lens is in the realm of diversity and inclusion. Number two, to sort of that same point, is that you've got to become an expert in your business. How does the business make money? What could help the business become richer and faster? And what are the gaps between what I'm trying to sell to the business and why they won't absorb it? And how can I help fill those gaps in a way that still makes them feel like they're not losing time or money? Full stop. That's hard in this world, actually, because I'm talking about diversity in particular. A lot of businesses value speed, especially in the tech industry, and they value butts and seats, fast, right? So we're talking about, and that is usually juxtaposed to building balanced teams. because we know that when we put a job, not application, but for people to apply to jobs, a requisition out on the internet, most of the applicants will be white men in almost any given industry for almost any given job. And so the likelihood of filling those roles with white men greatly increases, not to mention in certain industries, the availability of talent and, all of those other factors that really lay on top of it. But in any given role, in any given industry, with the exception of just a few, like HR, perhaps marketing is another one, the influx will be white men. And so it's not even on purpose that people are not giving the time to create diverse pipelines. It's just that in order to move quickly and to put butts in seats, you're going to utilize the easiest, quickest pipeline that you can get your hands on. And so it really involves like, okay, what is this business solution? Where is the gap? And how can we be proactive about filling the gap in order to still meet the business needs while also building balanced teams, right? So that's number two. You've got to know your business, and you've got to be able to talk the language of the business and knows what makes them faster, smarter, and richer, and contribute to that end. And so those are the two that I think are most important.
Yeah, I love your point on being able to speak the language of the business. I spent a lot of time in telecommunications, and we had this phrase, can you talk trucks? And what that meant is you're sitting in a conference room, but if you don't know how a line gets put in, right? This is Verizon, this is the telephone company. If you can't talk trucks, you don't get credibility, you don't get instant understanding, and you don't get the opportunity to influence. So knowing the language of your business is critical. Those are fantastic, fantastic skills. I'm also wondering about this onslaught of DEI and what happens next. Do you think that DEI is going to be able to survive this? And if so, what do you think we should be doing to bring that about?
Yeah. So before I answer that question, I just want to go back to the previous question real quick.
Sure.
Because I love your point about can you talk trucks? I want to make it clear. This is not the ability to talk sports if you're not in the sports industry.
Exactly.
And what I mean by that is like the language of your team could be that they get on. Maybe you're a woman on the team. I'm making a whole bunch of assumptions here. So just, if you're listening, roll with me and try to understand the spirit of what I'm trying to say. But maybe you're a woman on the team. Maybe you're only one of a couple women. And every time a team meeting starts, the other team members are talking sports and you have no interest in sports. And this is actually a real life thing. This happens very often. And if you ask any given company, it's normally like on their sales teams or something like that. So this happens a good amount, but it doesn't mean that you have to know how to talk sports or, contribute to an environment that's not creating a safe space of belonging for people. That's not what we mean about talk the language of your business. We're actually talking what your business does to make money. And if you work for the NBA, then hell, that is sports. But if not, then it might not be. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, is DEI dead? No. We just talked about this. It ebbs and it flows. You know what we talked about in the last answer? The ability to look at data. Yes. And to analyze data and to analyze patterns and to think about what can happen next based on the data that we've already analyzed. And so if we look strictly at that data, we know it's not over. I will say it's super discouraging right now. It's heavy. And I do personally feel like even though every time there's a dip in the appreciation and the community around diversity and inclusion and creating fairness, there's always a little bit of a slide. I feel like the slide this time is bigger than it's been. That I'll say. I feel like the slide is bigger. I feel like we're really moving many groups of people backwards. Not only one group of people in one industry or one neighborhood. Like we're moving a lot of people backwards. And we're doing it with laws and policy. So it's hard to swallow this time, but it's not over. It hasn't been over since it started, and it started well before any of us were alive to tell the story.
Yeah.
So it's certainly not over, but what's next is a lot of rebuilding. And also, what's next is getting smarter about how we do it. And I think if we pay close attention to what's happening right now, the benefit is we talked about character a little while ago, right? And being able, character is defined by what you're able to sacrifice essentially by standing up or by speaking up when you don't have to do it at all. What we are seeing is the true character of a lot of people around us who might have been supportive in 2020, but as soon as they have the permission, the green light, and even the encouragement to do something different, you're able to see people's true character. I always think that's an advantage. So in the lull right now, like clock in your mind, what do the kids say now? Clocking. Clock in your mind what's actually happening so that when it comes back around again, we're not making such surface improvements. And we're not buying it that just because you're nodding, you're aligned. And so we learn how to dig a little bit deeper. That's what I think should be next. And more important than what's next is being set up by what we can do right in this moment.
That's a really powerful thought, right? It's giving people hope and inspiration. It's cyclical. This too shall pass. There is things that you can be doing. There are things that you could be doing right now to be ready for when your time comes again. And clock what's actually happening. Who's on your side? Who is
Hey,
not? Whose character is actually showing?
so I mentioned I have a teenager. She's
Yes.
15, she's almost 16, she's in high school. And I mentioned how cruel, like, friends are not really your friends, and the whole deal.
Yeah.
What I always tell her is like, Layla, what you're learning right now is valuable. It doesn't feel good. I know it sucks, but what you're learning right now is a life lesson. You're learning about people. You're learning about how they work. You're learning about who you can trust, who you can't trust. You're learning like all of these different lessons that you learn during the really hard times. And it's like that in our personal lives, right? Like there's never been anyone who's successful at anything without having really hardships. I know we're
Yeah.
selling the whole soft life thing lately or whatever. And I hope that to be true for a lot of people. But I will tell you that hard times build hard behinds, and resilience is a life skill. So even though it's so hard right now, I do think there's a real opportunity to take a step back and observe the behavior of humans so that we can make impactful decisions, because we're only still going to be influencing humans. These are the same jokers that will be here 5 years from now, right?
Right.
It's a good time to make those observations.
Yeah, I love that. I can't pass up the opportunity of having a Black woman, mother, professional in front of us and not ask you, what advice do you have for the women out there who are much like yourself, trying to do so much and have a big impact and having really big, full lives? What are the strengths that we should hold on to? And what are some of the challenges that you think are true for women and that we need to be aware of?
I think it's getting even more challenging for women right now. And I mentioned it before, like even in terms of policies or whatever, like in some states we're losing control over our own bodies again. Like being a woman right now is really difficult. So let me just start by applauding the women that are listening for getting out of bed today. If you made it out of bed, like woohoo for you. If you didn't make it out of bed but just open up your eyes, amazing. And tomorrow maybe just try to put one foot on the floor and see like step by step how we can improve. And really, that's the advice. It is one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
I find that for myself, I am such a perfectionist and I'm so hard on myself that I often feel like I'm not doing good enough. When even if all of the balls are in the air and doing well, there's always something that I see that I feel like I can be doing better and more. And I think that's one of our biggest flaws as women. We expect so much from ourselves. Other people really expect so much of us as well. And I think the real name of the game is one foot in front of the other. And sis, you will get there. And it's the same thing that I do tell my children. So I have a 15-year-old and I have a 9-month-old. So the 9-month-old, really what I'm telling her is like, good job on your milk. So we're not there yet. But for the older one, for sure, she's another one who has really high expectations of herself. And it's like, you actually don't have to do this much, and have some grace. And that's also another thing that I need to continue to tell myself, because when people tell me to have grace, I always say, I don't know to have fun. Who's Grace? I don't know who that is. So, it's something that I need to constantly remind myself as well. But it's hard out here in these streets right now. We are carrying so much on our shoulders while also being pushed against. So, again, like, kudos to all of us for showing up, and show up tomorrow. You don't have to build a whole wall tomorrow. If you just put one brick on top of that wall, eventually the entire wall will be built, one brick at a time.
One brick at a time. As we wrap up our time together, I really need to know how you're doing in these times. How are you coping?
I said it's tough out here in these streets. I meant it.
Yeah.
I meant it. It's stressful. It's stressful living in the world right now. And I don't know how you feel. Some people are able to block it out better than others. I've attempted, but I'm deeply impacted by all of the changes that have been made for so many groups of people, not only for myself. I mean, I'm deeply, deeply saddened as someone who really cares about the experiences of other people. We mentioned it, going back to my 8-year-old self, like, it tears me up on the inside to see so many people ill affected in this moment. And then personally, for what I do for work, it's also a scary, scary moment. Every day waking up thinking, like, am I going to lose my job today? Or if I don't lose my job, how can I continue to be impactful for the people that I work with, that I've made this commitment to? How do I continue to be impactful to the business leaders, so that it's not only about, I made a commitment to create, more fair practices for our employees, but also as a leader, you feel like the business is benefiting from it. That's something that's always been on my mind, but I feel like is more elevated and amplified in this moment, to continue to have to show up. And it's really hard some days just to show up for myself. Then add on top of that, because the whole world is sort of going through it right now, you're carrying, or I am carrying, the weight of what's happening, just for the implications for my personal life. And then you get out of work and people want to talk to you about what's happening in the world. And so because that's a normal thing to talk about right now. Yeah, you can't escape it. So I say all that to say, I'm holding up, but I've decided very definitively that I'm human. And I've also decided that it's okay to let go of the things that I cannot change at this very moment, and that people and things will be okay without my constant attention and without my constant high touch. My kid is okay at school today. I do not need to be worried about how her math class is going. She's fine. And if it's not going well, she'll tell me when she gets home. Like, I can start unloading some of the things that really literally keep me up at night.
That's very wise, and a good way of taking care of yourself. And any advice for our listeners?
Same. Same. Unload it. And in addition to that, look, I don't want this conversation to come across as a gloss over of how hard it is right now, specifically if you're working in DEI, or if your career has been in DEI and maybe you're not working right now. It is so hard. It is so stressful. And if you could hold on to the hope the idea that this is actually not the end, but another bump in the road, then I'd encourage you to hold on to it. And I will also say something that I tell myself, and I don't know everybody individually, so I can't like make this blanket statement, but maybe you find it to be true. I've never actually lost. There's been times in life where I feel like I lost. There are times in my life where I was broke as heck, especially when I was younger. I would feel like I lost. Shoot, I remember so I moved out of my house when I was 17. And I remember being like 18 years old. I had an eviction notice on my door every single month. And I would have to go to court. And I would never actually got evicted because I was able to pay. But I was making so little money that I had to put together several paychecks in order to pay my rent that at the time was $600 a month. It was another time. But I remember every single time that I left the courthouse distinctly just saying thank you, thank you, thank you for the opportunity I have to like still go home and to still make it right. And I would sometimes be in the parking lot crying, but still thankful. And I never actually lost because now, like, even when I look back on everything else in my life, both negative and positive, that have gotten me to this point, I would have never thought 10 years ago that I'd be who I am today. 20 years ago, you can forget about it. Like, I would have been like, we're who? We do what for who? And so I will say that the story is still unfolding. And don't lose hope in the next chapter, even though we can't see the next chapter yet. But while the next chapter is still being written, there's still an opportunity to influence what will unfold in the pages ahead of us. And so use this chance to let it unfold. It's like when you decide to stay in the bed in the morning, even though you have something to do, and you keep pressing the snooze button. And then you have to think to yourself, like, look, these extra 10 minutes in the bed is actually not going to affect my day hugely. But if I use these 10 minutes to wash my face, brush my teeth, and take a shower, actually will help me get ahead big time from the next thing that I have to do. So my encouragement is uh, get up, brush your teeth, wash your face, take a shower, and use this time to help rewrite the next chapter.
Yeah, that's powerful advice that I hope our listeners are taking away with this. You know, one of our goals in doing this podcast is to have sin pelos en la lengua, right? By that, we mean speaking the truth and going deeper into the conversation. And I think you've lived up to that so beautifully. Thank you for all of your insights and the wonderful advice that you've shared with our listeners. It's been absolutely a pleasure reconnecting with you and expect that I'll be knocking on your door again in the future because I love having you on.
Please do. Thank you so much. And to that end, pa'lante como un elefante, which means keep moving forward like the elephant. Let's go.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.